So I guess I'm also going to try to address this problem of the political edge of Lubitsch comedy, but in a, let's say, slightly different direction. So I'm going to talk about the film Trouble in Paradise from 1928. And let me just jump immediately into the question of the Lubitsch touch. Like, what is this Lubitsch touch? Lubitsch is a director who works by indirection. So he's a master of the oblique, the elusive, and the suggestive. His basic principle could be stated: never say things directly when a good metaphor will do. I think that's also part of the lesson of psychoanalysis. It's not that you make a slip of the tongue and there's some kind of distortion, but behind that there's a more direct desire. It's actually, the distortion is the most direct way to say what you want to say. Or you could say with Lubitsch, the metaphor is the message, in a way. So just to give a couple of quotes from film critics who've tried to distill this kind of essence of the Lubitsch style, the Lubitsch touch. Gerald Mast calls it an art of omission, an art of the not. So Lubitsch excels at not showing things, at leaving things unsaid, at absences and ellipses. But this showing less at the same time goes together with its opposite, a showing more. So the corollary of kind of gaps in Lubitsch's films would be the investment of ordinary objects, like buttons or canes, swords, or as we'll see, a handbag, with an unusual significance. So in his first American film, actually his star, Mary Pickford, was complaining that Lubitsch is a director of doors, and I think that's very accurate. And one could say before Hitchcock, who's known as a sort of great fetishistic director of objects in a way, I think there's Lubitsch. Another quotation from Raymond Dourna, quote, "The famous Lubitsch touch is not so much a something added to a story as a method of telling a story through ellipsis and emphasis. Omitting the obvious presentation, Lubitsch substitutes elusive detail and then emphasizes that detail in such a way that the sweet nothing becomes an ornamental equivalent to the dramatic sense." So there's a kind of dialectic or movement between lack and surplus, with a kind of unexpected displacement of emphasis and a crafty correlation between the absence of something and the presence of curious detail. So I think that can be seen in a way as the hallmark of Lubitsch's style. The Trouble in Paradise now arguably presents the greatest accomplishment of the director's technique. So the film has been widely praised for its elegant construction, where the touch is kind of at its lightest and most deft. So, quote, "As for pure style," Lubitsch reminisced in 1947 while he was looking back on his career, "as for pure style, I think I have done nothing better or as good." So the film was made in, the film was made in 1928 or 1932? I think I have it mistyped here. The film was made in 32, okay. With his longtime collaborator, Samson Raphaelson, writing the screenplay. I think that's also one of his greatest screenplays, which is based, as is typical for Lubitsch, on an obscure Hungarian play. Now, let me just provide a very short summary of the film. It goes like this, sort of the plot. Trouble in Paradise is basically a love triangle involving two high society thieves and a wealthy heiress, who is the owner of a perfume conglomerate called Collet and Company, and it's set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, which again is almost never directly present, but is frequently alluded to. A clever variation on the gentleman crook genre, Lubitsch's film is a rarefied and suave comedy of manners, where appearances are almost always deceiving, and the best laid plans turn against their conspirators and then turn back again. So the action starts off in Venice, where the famed thief Gaston Monescu has just robbed a certain Monsieur Philibert while disguised as a doctor. A few doors down, so in the hotel, now posing as the Baron, he's dining with a beautiful Comtesse, who is in reality the high-class crook Lily. Okay. "It must be the most marvelous supper," he tells the waiter. "We may not eat it, but it must be marvelous." The two quickly discover they are both imposters and career thieves, and they fall madly in love. We now shift to Paris. The happy couple has fallen on hard times. To procure needed funds to fund their extravagant lifestyle, Gaston steals the jeweled handbag of Madame Collet, or Mariette, one night at the opera. Upon discovering that she is offering a substantial reward for the recovery of the handbag, he decides to return it to its owner instead of selling it, fencing it. So the meeting between Gaston and Mariette goes even better than he hoped. She's charmed by his polished and confident manners, and she hires him as her personal secretary. A new plan is now hatched. Gaston and Lily is now posing, Gaston is posing as the Monsieur Laval, and Lily as the assistant Mademoiselle Gauthier. They're going to take Madame Collet for as much as they can. So it's a great scheme, but the trouble is Gaston falls in love with his mark. Meanwhile, Philibert, who happens to be one of Madame Collet's suitors, bumps into Gaston at a cocktail party at Madame's house. While he doesn't immediately recognize the robber doctor from Venice, Gaston knows he does not have long. And adding to the difficulties is the CEO of Collet & Company, this Monsieur Giron, who hates Gaston's influence and starts to suspect him of foul play. And Giron, it's later revealed, is actually far from innocent. He is a kind of corrupt CEO who's embezzling cash from the company. Gaston and Lily prudently decide just to take what they can and run, foregoing a much larger sum. But when Gaston changes their departure date at the last minute, Lily knows she's been betrayed. So there follows a series of confrontations at Madame Collet's house, first between Giron and Gaston, then Gaston and Lily, then Gaston and Mariette, then Mariette and Lily, and finally all three lovers together. So one point I make in the kind of longer version of this paper is it's extremely difficult to summarize the plot of a Lubitsch film. So this is sort of a failed attempt, but okay. The result, anyway, at the end, is that the truth of Gaston's identity is revealed, and Lily storms out, leaving him to his new lover and his new life. Now, after a kind of poignant romantic exchange, Gaston in turn leaves Mariette, and there's a kind of this beautiful exchange where he says, "It could have been glorious, lovely, divine, oh, but that terrible policeman." So that's the end of that relationship. And the film kind of ends in the back of a taxi cab where the original couple is reunited. It's kind of a remarriage comedy in that sense. The original couple is reunited, and they're kind of happy again and on the run. So it has a kind of comedic happy ending. So the three themes in the film are really style, money, and love. These are the three themes that one should analyze. But as this kind of truncated outline, okay, that leaves aside the whole impact of the film and its charm, I would just like to look at a few specific examples of Lubitsch's technique. So let me see if I can. This is the very beginning of the film.
Most any place can seem to be a paradise, while you embrace just the one that you adore. There needn't be an apple tree with magic powers. You need no garden filled with flowers to taste the thrill of sweet, sweet hours. Gentle perfume and cushions that are silk and soft. Two in the gloom that is silent but for sight. That's paradise, while arms entwined, lips are kissing. But if there's something missing, that signifies trouble in paradise.
So, let me make two comments. I mean, already this beginning, like a minute and a half, is kind of full of brilliant sort of details. The opening credits is a good example of the Lubitsch touch. There's already something very special in the title sequence. So, right after the Paramount logo, the phrase "Trouble In" appears on screen, And then what immediately follows is the image of a fancy double bed. So we get trouble in bed, basically, as a kind of verbal, visual and verbal joke. And then we wait a few seconds, and then the word paradise fades in to complete the title. And then the credits roll out with the names of the two female stars. So we get Miriam Hopkins and Kay Francis appearing just above Herbert Marshall, forming the triangle in the bed. So the graphic design alone is a kind of triumph of the sly obscenity. And meanwhile, the soundtrack is singing, "Most any place can seem to be a paradise while you embrace just the one that you adore." So the question is this trouble in bed? Is it going to be a sex farce? Is the bed the paradise, or is the bed the source of the trouble? So that's already the beginning. Now, the next would be the opening scene. One can say, I think this is one of perhaps Lubitsch's greatest opening, and certainly the most subversive depiction of Venice in the history of cinema. So he starts off in Venice, and what does he show? It's night. So you have no glorious sort of scene of the canals, of the kind of beauty of Venice, of the palace, of the palazzo, and so forth. You have nighttime, it's very obscure, and you see somebody taking out the trash, loading it into a garbage gondola, and then serenading it. I don't think there's any equivalent to that in the history of cinema, Venice being a sort of paradigmatic, sort of sublime cinematic object. And I also thought, maybe in another form of this lecture, but I thought it might be fun to make film clips just of how Venice has been depicted in cinema. And it always is a glorious opening shot of a gondola or of the palazzo and so forth. But here, there's a kind of reversal of all the cliches, and we just have garbage. So Lubitsch liked to open with trash. And you also see that in Clooney Brown, where I almost have to say there's a kind of repetition of this opening in Clooney Brown. It's not exactly the opening, but within a couple of minutes, we get that image of the clogged sink. So somehow, comedy starts with the garbage, as it were. And then let me give you another example of this Lubitsch touch. This will. Oops.
I want you to stay, Maria. You've got to stay. You can't go now.
I must go.
I'm crazy about you.
I know it.
I love you.
I believe you.
Then why do you want to go?
Because I want to make it tough for you.
Huh?
We have a long time ahead of us, Gaston. Weeks, months, years.
Okay, so I also think this is one of the most beautiful edits in maybe all of Lubitsch's cinema. So the bed is a kind of central object in the film, and nowhere is it more strikingly used as a setting and as a metaphor than in this scene. Gaston has professed his love for Mariette and implores her to cancel her engagement and spend the night with him. Okay, we have a long time ahead of us, the weeks, months, and years. And each word, there's presented a kind of frozen tableau. We kind of have a frozen tableau of the two lovers. First in a mirror over the bed, weeks. Then in the circular mirror on the dressing table, months. And finally, as kind of shadows fallen on the white bed sheets, the two silhouettes slowly bending towards each other and embracing years. So we have a sexuality in the shadows, a passion suspended in the void. We see nothing but outlines and reflections, but this tells us everything about the slow burning sort of intensity of their desire, which will be so different from this kind of kinky kinetics, this fast moving pace of the relationship between Gaston and Lily. So you can also see what a visual, so there's also a tendency because the scripts are so rich, to focus on the stories, But in fact, you see that he had just such a visual brilliance, and the way he depicts the two relationships and the difference between them is actually with editing, speed, and the speed of the scenes and the kind of edits. So there's also, let me say, a real visual brilliance in Lubitsch. So this montage works, I think, both to arrest the passage of time and at the same time to kind of impossibly accelerate it. That's what's so interesting, that it stops, we see like frozen sequences, but time is speeding ahead, weeks, months, years. So you could also quote like a famous Fenelon talking about like this kind of mystic love. In this divine ravishing, the centuries pass by more rapidly than the hours. Okay. Next section of the paper, what is the trouble in paradise? So while the Lubitsch touch is often viewed as a clever way of evading censorship, it cannot be reduced simply to as a vehicle for smuggling in kind of illicit content. So the touch is not just an efficient means to overcome sexual or political taboos, but itself is the message it wants to convey. And if there's a veritable connection between Lubitsch and psychoanalysis, it lies not so much in shared themes like sexuality, love, or it takes more than two to make a couple, one of Lubitsch's great themes, but I think in this distinct formal sensibility. Incidentally, there's a wonderful exchange about psychoanalysis in the film That Uncertain Feeling. And there's a kind of there's an exchange between the psychoanalyst and his new patient. And the psychoanalyst at one point says, "Wouldn't you like to meet you?" And the patient replies, "No, you see, I'm a little bit shy." So I think this is one of the most graceful expressions we have of what it means to just, let's leave the unconscious. But Lubitsch, like Freud, is less concerned with the hidden meaning of things than with how these hidden meanings are expressed on the surface. So that's the key point. It's not the hidden meaning that's important, but it's how the hidden meaning is expressed on the surface. So what fascinates him is not so much the buried contents of the unconscious as the displacements, short circuits, and reversals by which these contents manifest themselves. And who knows? Perhaps it may be interesting to think about this. Who knows? Maybe deep down inside all of us, there's just the same filthy banalities that are endlessly repeated. There's nothing that really singularizes you about your deepest desires. But what really makes you unique is the kind of distortions and tics, the creative ciphering that expresses sort of the unique way you express an utterly banal content. Okay. So, I will skip. So I want to say a few words about style, go into that more deeply. I will skip a more technical discussion, but what I discovered also is in Lacan's work, style is a kind of underrated concept. And that goes from the very, very early days, from his text in the 1930s, and also the very beginning of his book, Écrit. He has these comments about style. So I kind of wanted to try to raise that to the level of concept, you could say. But style can be defined in a couple different ways. And this film is nothing if not very stylish. And let me play another clip that I think illustrates this. This is a bit longer. I think it lasts about 3 minutes. So,
That's hotel life. In one room, a man loses his wallet, and in another room, a man loses his head.
Please, when I came here, it was for a little adventure, or a little game which you play tonight and forget tomorrow. Something's changed me, and it isn't the champagne. Well, the whole thing's so new to me. I have a confession to make to you. Baron, you are a crook. You robbed the gentleman in 253, 5, 7, and 9. May I have the soap?
Please.
Thank you.
The pepper too?
What? Oh, no, thank you.
You're very welcome. Countess, believe me, before you left this room, I would have told you everything. And let me say this with love in my heart. Countess, you are a thief. The wallet of the gentleman 253, 5, 7, and 9 is in your possession. I knew it very well when you took it out of my pocket. In fact, you tickled me. But your embrace was so sweet.
I like you, Baron.
I'm crazy about you. By the way, your pin. a very good story.
What time is it? It was 5 minutes slow, but I regulated it for you.
I hope you don't mind if I keep your garter.
Darling! Oh, my darling, tell me all about yourself. Who are you?
You remember the man who walked into the Bank of Constantinople and walked out with the Bank of Constantinople?
Monesco.
Gaston Monesco.
Okay, so let's analyze this scene. I think style can be defined in different ways. On an imaginary level, style means it designates a kind of ideal of behavior and appearance. So what counts as stylish, of course, is totally contingent and just changes according to time and place. And in a way, Trouble in Paradise embodies this sort of pastiche European ideal of elegance and of manners. And it exploits these conventions for a comic effect. So there's lots of sort of details about this. There's a nice side joke on the film's target audience when Lily flatters Gaston by having mistaken him for an American. So she says, somebody from another world, so entirely different. So on a symbolic level, so that's really the imaginary kind of ideal of style to conform to a certain code of behavior. On a symbolic level, though, style doesn't refer to sort of a particular content, but to the way an actor or subject relates to his or her performance. So what's typical of Lubitsch films is that actors not only act, but they act at acting. They act their acting. And his comedies exploit the phenomena of theatricalization. And of course, To Be or Not to Be is the ultimate sort of film about the comedy of theatricalization. But it's also very much present in this film. Where the characters appear to be in a kind of perfect, even a kind of too perfect possession of their roles. So the coolness and the imperturbability of the consummately polished performances is no doubt one of the main reasons why Lubitsch considered this film his best for pure style. And if we look at this first meeting, everything in Gaston's chic Venetian suite is there for show, including this, so as he says earlier, the moon that should appear in the champagne, and the dinner that has to be marvelous even though we might not eat it. This scene is staged as a kind of play within a play. Gaston and Lily are playing Baron and Countess, but at the same time they're both aware of the fact that the other one is acting. So she knows he's the thief who robbed the wallet of the gentleman in 253, 57, and 9, because she lifted the wallet off his person, and he knows that she too is a crook because she tickled him when she pickpocketed him. So in maintaining the charade, the actors show a supreme self-control and elegance, a kind of comically exaggerated adherence to appearances. And the sublime moment comes when the Countess confesses to the Baron that he's a crook, and then politely asks him right afterwards, please pass the salt. So totally undisturbed by the accusation, he offers her the pepper too. So there's a kind of ethics of adherence to the appearances, not to be perturbed, surprised, not to show a kind of self underneath the appearances, but to manipulate the appearances themselves. To paraphrase a line from Lacan, you could say, the unstylish question that we're normally plagued with in everyday life, a very unstylish question is to ask, does the role I'm playing correspond to who I really am? If I'm playing a role, does that correspond to deep down who I really am? The stylish question would be, am I up to or am I worthy of the role that I'm playing? Can I perform at the level demanded of me by the situation? Okay, there's another twist, however, and neither Lubitsch nor Lacan, has said the final word about style. At one point, Lacan says, it is the object, so I quote, it is the object that corresponds to the question of style I'm raising. And he further adds that the term man, in a quotation from Buffon, so this idea that the style makes the man, should be replaced by the idea of the object. Style is the object, according to Lacan, another quotation. So style refers neither to imaginary ideals or to symbolic norms of acting, but refers to the object, which we already heard about in Alenka's presentation. Style somehow has to do with the staging of a kind of object. And it's ultimately the object which stylizes and which poses the problem of style, precisely as something that kind of troubles the workings, the smooth workings of this performance machine. Maybe I can make an abrupt sort of shift and raise the question, why is Lubitsch known specifically for his touch as opposed to other great cinematic auteurs? Because you could multiply the touches. We could talk about a Scorsese touch, which would be his pioneering use of like long traveling shots, or a Tarkovsky's touch, the sculpting in time, or a Sergio Leone touch, the face as a kind of landscape, a Hitchcock touch, okay, etc., etc. So, but it seems like in cinema, one talks about Lubitsch touch especially. And why? I think in a certain sense, every great author has his or her unique signature. But what's perhaps different about Lubitsch, and at the risk of overstating my case, it's that his style is not just one style among many styles, but somehow stands in the cinematic lexicon for style as such. So that any event worthy of its name should find its truth in kind of just the right gesture, or a kind of sweet nothing, or a stray, lucky object, is with Lubitsch practically an ethical imperative, or it's the question of style itself. Okay, so if style is the object, then what is the object we're dealing with in this film, Trouble in Paradise? One hint can be discerned. Let me just tell you a short aphorism from Émile Cioran, Romanian French philosopher. It's just a quote, a short quote. He says, "I ponder C, for whom drinking in a cafe was the sole reason to exist. One day when I was eloquently vaunting Buddhism to him, he replied, well, yes, nirvana all right, but not without a cafe," end quote. So you could say for Cioran, the cafe is a kind of troublesome object. So the cafe is a kind of troublesome object which disturbs the peacefulness of paradise and nirvana, but through this very disturbance, it also renders it bearable, livable. One could reiterate something like this. Well, yes, paradise is wonderful, but only on one condition. There has to be the odd detail that messes it up. This would also seem to be Lubitsch's underlying message, that the trouble in paradise is also the trouble with paradise. So imbalance and disharmony are the very soul of desire, so that the object of desire is what would embody this turbulence rather than just putting a happy end to it. I want to make it tough for you, as Mariette tells Gaston. And in a way, Lubitsch's method is one of making the simple task of storytelling a lot tougher than it has to be. So he's always searching for clever ways of not telling the story he wants to tell. This is also part of a kind of Lubitchian directorial ethics. So the obstacle to the task actually becomes the goal of the task itself. But we can also read the title of the film in another way. So as the opening credits reveal, the trouble in paradise is a trouble in bed, sexual trouble, and thus, sexual commotion. But the bed in the film is above all the bed of Madame Collet, upon which the shadow of the lovers, fatefully fall, as we saw in that other clip. So could it be that paradise is actually the scandalous love affair of Gaston and Lily, the two chic thieves who are fending for themselves, and trouble is the sublimely statuesque Mariette. So in a kind of tantalizing irony, Mariette would be the snake that lures Gaston from the sinful Garden of Eden, into a kind of respectable bourgeois life. So at least one thing is certain: the determination of the object has to pass through the analysis of these two couples. Let me shift gears. The next section of the paper would be titled "In Times Like These," and let me look more now at the problem of money and start with a joke. It's from Freud. It's from his book on jokes. A gentleman entered a pastry cook's shop and orders a cake. But he soon brought it back and asked for a glass of liquor instead. He drinks the glass of liquor and then he gets up to leave without paying. The proprietor stops him. "What do you want?" asks the customer. "Well, you didn't pay for the liquor." "Yeah, but I gave you the cake in exchange for it." "Yeah, but you didn't pay for the cake either." "Yeah, but I didn't eat the cake." This kind of wonderful joke is an example of what Freud calls nonsense technique. So the appearance of the logic, it has an appearance of logic, but it hides a faulty reasoning. The joke is really a piece of sophistry. So as Freud explains, the trick is that the word exchange is used in two different and incompatible ways. But, you know, as is the case often with these kind of jokes, you can also ask if there's not a sort of deeper truth in the defective reasoning or deeper truth in the nonsense. And in fact, this kind of ridiculous barter provides a nice illustration of the violence that underlies so-called primitive accumulation constitutive of capitalism. So first one steals something, you expropriate resources, then you trade the plunder you didn't pay for back to its original owners in order to extract extra profit from it. So in other words, property is theft. Or as the famous line from Brecht from the Three-Penny Opera goes, you know, what is the crime of robbing a bank compared to the crime of founding a bank, which gains a new resonance today in the contemporary European problems. These reversals capture well the kind of comic dialectics of Trouble in Paradise, which admits no bright line between law and transgression, honesty and villainy. In Lubitsch's universe, there's only kind of degrees of theft, and not only the self-made criminals, but everybody seems to be a crook. So just as in this pastry shop joke, at the center of the film lies what will prove to be false exchange. Gaston steals Madame Coulet's handbag, and then he gives the handbag back to her, first in exchange for a check, money, and he says, make it out to cash. And then, as it turns out, he wants something else from her. So the crooked maxim of the film would be something like, you know, return to the owner what you've stolen from her in order to exchange it for other goods. So there's kind of interesting, let's say, exchange economy. Now, as I mentioned, okay, Trouble in Paradise was made in 1932, at a time when the world economy was in full decline, and even though it's only glimpsed a rise, so we encounter just one sort of revolutionary in the film, who is a bit ridiculized, and we catch a kind of brief glimpse of factors in a perfume ad, but that's kind of it. But still, the social and historical context is very much a part of the film. If Ninochka is a film about communism, and To Be or Not to Be is a film about fascism, Trouble in Paradise is a comic treatment of the worst economic crisis the world has seen, the Great Depression. And this is why I think it should be, you know, required viewing today in the midst of the kind of financial crisis. This is a great sort of comedy of financial crisis. I could add to that the first film of Preston Sturges, The Great McGinty, is a kind of great comic treatment of corruption. So if you want to get some sort of sense, some perspective on the kind of crisis of capitalism today, I can recommend nothing more than to watch Lubitsch's Trouble in Paradise and The Great McGinty of Sturges. So these three films, and I think these three films are somehow the most socially conscious or engaged in Lubitsch's oeuvre, form a kind of trilogy which deals with the crisis of capitalism and the two historical solutions to the crisis of capitalism, namely fascism and communism. And in times like these, okay, so I repeat myself, of budget cuts and Eurozone bailouts and whatnot, the film's study of capitalist matters has only gained in relevance. Now, there's one running gag throughout the film, and that consists in the repeated use of the line, in times like these, which is a catchphrase meant to convey an air of sort of resigned worldly wisdom on its speaker. So in this film, it's equally invoked by the CEO, the Bolshevik, the crook, and the society lady, and it becomes, in Lubitsch's hands, sort of a vehicle for biting social satire, and I also think this is a good example of ideology critique in action. So it sort of deconstructs this idea that the times, history, dictates anything from out of itself. So let's look quickly at that. I've just kind of chopped up these different scenes where this phrase is repeated. So, I'll show one other clip.
Go on, Madam Corey. If your husband were alive, the first thing he would do in times like these, cut salaries.
Any woman who spends a fortune in times like this for a handbag. Fool! Fool! And fool!
In times like these, when everything is uncertain, every conservative person should have a substantial part of his fortune within arm's reach.
Speaking for the board of directors, as well as for myself, if you insist, in times like these, on cutting the fees of the board of directors, then we resign.
But in times like these, when we're doing a cash business, why take a chance with jewelry?
How much is your salary? 300 francs. Well, in times like these, most people are cutting salaries. But in your case, suppose we say 350?
Okay, that's it. So, in a way, the first case presents a truly novel answer to the politics of austerity. You know, sorry, business is too boring to be bothered with budget cuts. Besides, I have a luncheon date. This is kind of the aristocratic answer to the financial crisis. And it could also be read from a feminist perspective as a kind of clever counter to the board's sort of condescending diktat. So she plays to the stereotype of feminine triviality, but she uses that stereotype against the board. Next, the board's sort of expert advice is thrown back at them when Gaston, acting in Madame Collet's name, decides not to cut the workers' salaries, but the executives' salaries. Now the refrain takes on a completely different meaning, which we also heard in the financial crisis. In difficult times, they call for even higher salaries, not low wages, because you have to attract the best talent. We see how slippery then this kind of in times like these really is. The real focus in this scene is on Gaston's kind of cool reply. He refuses to yield to corporate blackmail. He says, resign if you want to. The world isn't going to end. An utterly sensible position, which is, I think, even less imaginable today than when the film was actually made. So you could picture Gaston as a kind of financial regulator. Elsewhere, he uses the same line to warn Mariette against confidence in the banking system. In troubled times, you should keep your money at home. And of course, the irony here is that safe is a relative term because Gaston is actually setting up a more lucrative robbery. But you can't really blame him because the crooks have fallen on hard times too. So as he says, I'm a member of the nouveau poor. And anyway, who is the real thief here? Is it the man, so the man who walked into the Bank of Constantinople and walked out with the Bank of Constantinople? Is it the pickpocketing partner with her eye on the jewels, Lily? Or is it the opulent society lady who has the audacity to spend 125,000 francs on a handbag, also in times like these, when the economy is cratering? So there's a kind of, let's say, an interesting sort of moral relativism here. Or is the real crook this Monsieur Adolphe, I have enjoyed the confidence of this family for more than 40 years, Giron, who is the respected chairman of the board, who's been embezzling untold sums from Collet and Company while covering his tracks with fraudulent bookkeeping. So no one in this film is spared. Again, this is also typically Lubitsch. There's never somebody who somehow falls outside of the economy of the comedy, but everybody somehow is the object of kind of ridicule. So the satire cuts in all directions. Lubitsch's sympathy, however, is clearly for the classy, self-made criminals against the hypocritical institutional crooks. So in this radical comedy, thieves not only get away with the loot, but they actually go on to a charmed life of more thievery. That's how the film ends. And that's really an astonishing ending for a Hollywood picture of the 1930s, even today. But we should add that the other thieves will also presumably have a happy end too. Giron will be safe. There will be a hushed-up scandal or golden parachute. Madame will go on with her shopping sprees. The board will have its way. So everyone is stealing and no one is punished. That's Lubitsch's nutshell of the times. So, going a little bit further, Trouble in Paradise is a film of illicit exchanges. And one of the qualities of objects in this film is that they always tend to be missing from their place. Again, to go back to this idea that you have to have a place. Somehow the object in the film is always sort of not in the place it should be. Okay, I'll skip the longer analysis of this handbag, but it always is kind of moving where it shouldn't be. There's also a very sophisticated joke, about prostitution that's running throughout the film, and let me just dwell on that for a few moments. Scheming to seduce Gaston, Mariette plies Lily, so that her servant, Mademoiselle Gautier, for information one morning while they're eating breakfast in bed. That's the last clip I showed you. And Mariette offers to raise Mademoiselle Gautier's salary by kind of measly 50 francs. So she says, in times like these, when the salaries are being slashed, this token of generosity should go a long ways. This is this kind of condescending gift. Lily takes the offer for what it is as a naked bribe. And now she knows what's really going on. She knows that Mariette is really interested in Gaston. So she's really you, she tells Gaston. That's what she wants, and she's willing to pay as high as 50 francs for you. This indecent proposal then returns in what is maybe the most well-written scene of the film towards the end, as well as a kind of beautiful lesson in how you can break up. So kind of pedagogy in how you can leave your lover with a great dignity. Let me show you this scene. But basically, we're in Madame Collet's house, the three lovers. Lily has stolen 100,000 francs out of the safe. Okay? Gaston covers for her, and he takes the blame on himself. And then, supremely disappointed that Gaston chooses the money over her, Mariette goes into the next room. So she leaves him, goes in the next room, where she stumbles upon Lily, who's overheard this conversation, and then Lily confesses to the whole caper, and we get this scene. So, last clip. Yeah.
The only thing that seems to stand between you and romance is 100,000 francs. Well, he didn't take it. I took it. All by myself. Now you can have your romance.
I think you better go.
Ever had a romance with a crook?
I beg your pardon?
Let me give you a little advice. When you embrace him, be sure to put on gloves. It would be too bad if your fingerprints were found.
Mademoiselle Gautier, or whatever your name is, I thank you for your free advice, but I must ask you to go. You have your money?
I don't want your money. You wanted to buy him for 50 francs. Well, you can have him for nothing. And you, leave me alone. You were willing to sacrifice 100,000 francs for her. And you paid 125,000 francs for a handbag. Well, you can pay 100,000 for him. Goodbye, Madame Collet and company.
Okay, that's it. So this is actually a very sophisticated exchange kind of logic that's going on here. So not only does Lily sort of give up Gaston, but she also gives up the money. So first she has the money, then she gives up the money in kind of ethical gesture. I don't want your money. So she tosses the money back onto the bed, which is also, okay, very symbolic, let's say. So she tosses the money onto the bed. So the sexual commerce couldn't be clearer. It's really two women haggling over a man. It's kind of nice reversal. So you wanted to buy him for 50 francs, you could have him for nothing. So by means of this kind of double renunciation, Lily extracts herself from the obscene exchange that Mariette proposed earlier. Though Lily might be enthralled to money, she shows that she can't be bought. So not for 50 francs, not even for 100,000 francs. So that you have a kind of, let's say, classic expression of a kind of tragic dignity at this point. I can't be bought. Some values are beyond money. But this is the comic twist. Immediately afterwards, she retakes the cash in order to demonstrate exactly the same point. So she can't be bought, but Gaston can be bought. And in order to prove that he is the object of exchange, she has to take the money. So his not stealing the money, so the fact that Gaston didn't steal the money, that he values the woman more than the money, so his not stealing the money means actually that he has sold out, that he has prostituted himself or become a gigolo. And as proof of his corruption, she will accept 100,000 francs in exchange for him, a sum which, and this is the final insult, a sum which is less than what Madame paid for her handbag. So in a way, Lily, finally we have an example of somebody who gets to have their cake and eat it too. First she rejects the cash to prove that she can't be bought, then she accepts the cash to prove that the other can be sold. In psychoanalytic terms, you could say that Lily cheats castration. She doesn't have to choose between money and life. You can have it both ways. There's another way of reading this scene. I'll pass on that, but maybe if somebody wants to raise that. It's a very sophisticated sequence. Okay, I know I'm going a bit long, so just let me conclude by analyzing the function of this weird object, this wonderful object in the film, the handbag. So the film doesn't end with a breakup, but it ends with a reconciliation, even a kind of remarriage. And again, Lubitsch kind of reverses the standard logic. Instead of a kind of so the standard logic would be you have a respectable couple that breaks up because one of them has an adulterous affair, and then, after many trials and tribulations, they rediscover their true love for one another. Okay. Here we have a disreputable criminal couple where the man cheats by going straight, and then afterwards he returns to his faithfully lying, cheating, stealing partner. So paradise, the good life, is the life of crime, full of glamour and risks, and evil temptation comes in the form of Madame Collet, whose wealth holds the promise of a kind of easygoing dolce vita without real criminal daring or subterfuge, just the humdrum hypocrisy of the respectable classes. Or at least this is how it looks from Lily's perspective. What really bothers Lily is not only that Gaston betrays her by, again, not stealing the money, but that he also, and more fundamentally, betrays himself, or he betrays what he stands for, this kind of thief ideal. So, darling, she implores, remember your Gaston Monescu. You're a crook. I want you as a crook. I love you as a crook. I worship you as a crook. Steal, swindle, rob, but don't become one of those useful, good-for-nothing gigolos. This is what she does. Now, the key question that's actually been debated by critics of the film concerns the relationship between the two couples. And the question is, which is the true couple? Which is the true couple? Is it Gaston and Lily, or is it Gaston and Mariette? Where's the real love in the film? And actually, okay, it's a detail, but there's actually three couples in the film, because Madame Collet is actually, she has two suitors, this Monsieur Philibert and the Major. And they kind of have this rivalry with each other, which provides sort of comic relief from the main comic plot, if I can put it that way. And eventually, the two suitors, the two men, reconcile over their shared failure to possess the desired woman, proving that one of the best ways for men to become friends is through the solidarity of amorous rejection. So there's actually this kind of third couple. But anyway, Gaston and Lily seem to be really made for one another, but perhaps too much so. They're more partners than real lovers, and Lily seems to be missing that je ne sais quoi that Mariette has in abundance. Mariette, on the other hand, is less intrepid than Lily, but she has mystery and passion. So in Lubitsch's topsy-turvy universe, it's uncertain what exactly is trouble and what exactly is paradise. And perhaps the greatest irony of the film is the way that the criminals, the slick criminals, are kind of positioned as a dull bourgeois couple, while the high society lady stands for the fall, the dangerous transgression of the crooked duo's normal transgressive routine. This has been argued by James Harvey, a quote, Gaston in Trouble in Paradise, in the back of his taxi with Lily, has run out on Quai Francis. It's clear that he is returning to a challenging and rather dangerous career. He and Lily are both committed thieves, and they even show off their skills for us in the last scene by picking each other's pockets. Still, in every respect but their thievery, Gaston and Lily are a quintessential bourgeois couple, conscientious professional types with expensive tastes, yuppies before their time. Gaston and Mariette, on the other hand, are the really romantic pair, the adventurous and risk-taking lovers. In returning to Lily and lawlessness, Gaston is actually doing the sensible thing. He's returning to his station, as it were, opting for the life that he knows. And he does so full of regret, apparent in his lingering final change with Mariette, full of roux and stylish ardor on both sides. Here as elsewhere, Lubitsch and Rafelson have chosen just those possibilities that ironize or undercut the elements of romance and adventure. So, end quote. Now, then you could have the opposite interpretation. I'll go through that very quickly, where Liliette and Mariette, they represent exclusive but different, simply different notions of love, that they're defined by structural oppositions, which is also shown visually how they're depicted in the film. So Mariette would stand somehow for a desire that's always delayed, it's never consummated, it's in the shadows, whereas with Gaston and Lily, it's more a kind of drive-like love where things are moving fast and everything is always working, as it were, producing satisfaction. Okay, I simply want to point out, I think that there's a third possibility that's been overlooked by the critics, and that's that, neither of these interpretations are quite right. I would say that what matters in the film is not sort of the question of the differences between the two couples, but rather this question of the object. And remember, as I said at the beginning, Mary Pickford's complaint about Lubitsch that he's a director of doors. In some sense, I think she's right. The debate about which is the true couple, Gaston Lily or Gaston Mariette, still remains too focused on persons and not enough on doors, or in this instance, a handbag. And if there's something really transgressive, I think, in Lubitsch's presentation of love, it has to do with the emphasis on the object. So, just to review, this handbag has a very odd status in the film. It's kind of doubly, if not triply, displaced. So, in the first case, Gaston stole it from Mariette. So Gaston steals this handbag, but then when he explains to her, where he found it, he says that Mariette had left it at the opera in that little niche with a statue of Venus. So a place that she points out she never was. She said, I was never at that place. And this kind of leads to this kind of wonderful reply that, oh, you were never at that niche? Then this must not be your handbag. Similar to kind of Hitchcock's joke about the MacGuffin, There are no lions in the Scottish Highlands, well, then this is not a MacGuffin. So somehow, if the theory is not right, then reality has to be adjusted. Okay. Then furthermore, you could say, as this Bolshevik says at some point in the film, owning such an extravagant handbag in times like these is already a kind of theft. So her purchase is tainted with a kind of decadent order. And one also thinks here of Ninochka's verdict when she sees this fancy hat in a Parisian shop window, and she turns to her communist colleagues and says, it won't be not long now, comrades. So somehow also this jeweled purse and this handbag sort of concretize the sort of ridiculousness of the capitalist order. The property is already a kind of theft. So this accessory is displaced. It's stolen from Mariette's not possession, but illegitimate possession, and then it's falsely discovered where it never was. And then this object reappears at the end of the film, where it plays a kind of clinching role. So, in fact, I can just show an image. When I was teaching this film at a seminar, a student of mine produced these kind of wonderful schema showing how this handbag is sort of moving throughout the entire movie. Somehow, I can stop this.
You need to pause it.
I think I did. Okay, good. Sorry, I don't need the delay. So it plays this kind of key role at the very. This is an image from the very end of the film when Lily and Gaston are finally reunited. But the key question is, how does this reconciliation take place? Put simply, it takes place through the repetition of the original scene of seduction, this kind of game of mutual pickpocketing. So that scene I showed at the beginning. And this scene is both a kind of friendly rivalry, so a contest of talents. It's also a kind of shared complicity in a thief ideal, and it's also a sexual foreplay, kind of enjoyment of drives. But there's a key difference in this repetition. With perfect nonchalance, Lily produces from behind her back the jeweled handbag, which she apparently stole from Madame Collet's house right before she left. This is the kind of marvelous detail, or the sweet nothing, that contains the whole dramatic sense and almost magically reestablishes their amorous rapport. So repetition is itself doubled. And what is repeated is not only this kind of original scene of seduction, but the thing that was kind of missing from it. So in the Lubitchian lesson would be, you always have to steal a handbag twice. So in a way, the style is the object, or the style is the handbag. This handbag has no proper place, but you can't replace it. So when Philibert at one point tries to buy Mariette a new handbag, it's just a failure. You can't replace this object. It's not rightfully possessed by anyone, but it itself seems to possess whoever happens to be holding it. This is not just any handbag, after all. It's the handbag of Venus, the goddess of love. It's her precious treasure, or her agalma. And let's not forget the obvious sexual symbolism, which Lubitsch certainly does not. To seal love's bargain, Gaston stuffs Lily's purse full of his cash. So as there's a Lubitsch touch, there's also a Lubitsch solution, to follow a phrase of François Truffaut. And in this case, the solution is nothing other than the destiny of the object, whose appearance marks the rebirth of love and the reconstitution of a kind of fantasy after it's been shattered, or after the relationship has come to an end. So is this a happy or an unhappy ending? And does it even matter? I think in the end, Trouble in Paradise is the story of love's lost handbag, a distinctively modern retelling of the ancient myth of the birth of Eros from the illicit union of craftiness and poverty, from Poros and Pinia. And perhaps there's never been a more elegant illustration of the old saying than to love means literally to give what you don't have. Finish.